to the Hurricanes and now trail the series 3-2. We are on the post-game show. That is Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. Conor, people are going to say the curse of you is real.
What am I doing here, Evan? What am I
It's
doing here?
I can't believe this. We have to just stop scheduling you entirely at this point. You were on during the regular season for a Maple Leafs game that they lost, then games 1 and 2, now game 5. This is 0-4 now. This is getting out of hand in a sense. But anyways, there are lots of in-game topics that must be discussed. It is not the curse of Conor Ryan. That is why the Bruins are down 3-2 in this series. Maybe a little bit, but not fully. The big takeaway in this game, we're going to talk about two things. They both start with the letter O: offense and officiating. We'll start with the offense because I feel like this is a little more important given that, it is in the Bruins' hands. No offense in this game. None. Aside from the Brad Marchand chance on Ranta early in the first, where Ranta made a terrific save, and then I believe it was Postor. Someone had a really good chance later in the game. It was really just a couple big saves from Ranta. Other than that, no offense. I think this is concerning for a lot of reasons. Again, we've said on Bruins Beat, like, you stack that first line like they're doing, you expect to get goals out of them. But when they don't, you look behind them, there's not a whole lot in the bottom 9 after them. Just a terrible game offensively.
Yeah, no, very troubling. And I think when you look at what has kind of doomed this team in the past and previous postseason runs, a lot of it has usually been chalked up to a dearth of secondary scoring, right? And when you look at it, this seemed to be the year where it all, they finally solved that issue. You could make the argument going into the year that whether it was personnel maybe on defense or goaltending, you didn't know what you're going to get from Swayman and Olmark. There's going to be other things that were going to potentially doom the Bruins in the playoffs. But here we are kind of back at square one, right? Like, this was supposed to be the year where you had Haula being this unlikely 2C driving play with David Pastrnak and Taylor Hall, who seemed locked in. At spurts there in March and April, you had the Coyle line doing well. And now you're in this spot where, again, that top line's been great, especially on home ice, but going into a hostile building where you don't have last change, again, you hope maybe that the Bergeron line breaks even, if maybe not gets one punch in against the Stahl line, but a tall task asked for them. You need some other secondary scoring to step up there. And whether it's guys like Eric Haula and Craig Smith has no points in this series. Hall, I think, has 2 helpers. Taylor Hall didn't have a good game today. There's just so many other guys that you need to step up. And it's not like in previous situations where, look at like the 2019 Stanley Cup final, where it's all right, we need Carson Coleman, top 6 wing, to break through. Like, these aren't guys that you're
veteran
hoping,
David Backes.
Yeah. It's not the guys that you're hoping, we don't really know what we're going to get from them, or they weren't that good in the regular season. These are guys who were dominant down the stretch here. I mean, you look at Eric Haula and his production post trade deadline. You need more than just 2 secondary helpers for a guy like that, who is your 2C for most of this season. You need more from a guy like Craig Smith. You need more from a guy like Taylor Hall, maybe what he showed you in those first few games down in Carolina, where he was maybe your one solid forward out there. So all in all, very disappointing. And it's, I think, disheartening for the Bruins to kind of fall back into the same old flaws that doomed you before, considering you look at just how this year has gone. There was one thing you probably weren't expecting, was for the rest of that middle 6 to really not provide much of anything beyond the usual suspects up front.
I'll give Taylor Hall a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because he lost Pastrnak. I'll give him a little bit, but again, tonight was just rough. I mean, some of the missed shots, the lack of sustained ozone time. You look at Eric Haula too. I mean, just nothing there. And I always find it to be a really troubling sign when Cassidy starts mixing and intermingling with his lines and stuff mid-game. I think that is just always a sign that there is zero offense and there is zero offense to come. You look at kind of Lazar was up on the second line at one point. That's when there's a problem. And again, as you said, this team was not supposed to have this problem. This was supposed to be fixed. We've said it all year, right? The depth, as you said, carried them through parts of the second half. Like, that was the point. And as you said, Haula, Smith, Hall, even Nosek and others
barely played in that game too.
Barely played. I mean, he hasn't scored in like over 50 games. You'd even like a little maybe more from Charlie Coyle. You wonder if Trent Frederick goes back in the lineup, but again, you need offense. I don't look at Trent Frederick as a guy who's going to bring you that offense. You've got your best offensive guys out there. They're not producing. Another thing is, last change is a big thing, right? We say this every postseason. It's a really important aspect. It shouldn't mean this much, though, to where that they're just getting absolutely shut down to the point that they were. And a lot of that falls on them. Another thing that plagued them in this game was the officiating. Right, this is something that has become way too prevalent in recent postseasons, and I have this like battle in my head where it's like, I'm sick of complaining about the officials every year because at some point the Bruins do have to overcome bad officiating. Every team has to overcome bad officiating at some point, but this feels like it's all the time. And you look at like that Forbort scrum in the first period, that was egregious. And you look at some, the McAvoy interference call, both, by the way, led to goals. And I think that's when it's like, that's when you can complain. When there are just, and there were even some, there was one on Tony D'Angelo in the third on
Yeah.
Chris
On
Wagner that made
Wagner.
zero sense. Like, I just don't understand how they keep getting away with this.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely annoying, especially when you look at. I think those like scrum ones are the toughest ones, right? Where it's at the very least it's two guys going or nothing at all because the
Yes.
calendar's flipped to May and it's playoff hockey and scrums are to be expected. Again, though, that being said, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Evan, where it's very annoying, but doesn't get you much to be hopping on it in the immediate aftermath. Again, it's not something that I think is as egregious as like the a Chari trip or something like that. And again, as you said with the officiating, some of those weak calls, like look at the D'Angelo goal. Granted, you could make the D'Angelo penalty. Granted, you could make the argument that the game was out of reach at that point, but that's a gift. That's when you, as the power play, need to bury those chances, right? Like there's still other times where those plays either even out or there's other opportunities for you to get back in the game. Officiating didn't limit a guy like Craig Smith again to 0 points over 6 games. It didn't lead to so many
Yeah.
other middle six guys not pulling on the rope as well. I mean, it's just all around. It's frustrating, no doubt. It adds to a game where you had multiple plays where I'm sure Bruins fans were ripping their hair out, like the Kahlo, shot off DeBrus skates. It goes into the net. Like it was
Yes.
just kind of that kind of night for the Bruins. So I understand it's very frustrating, especially early on in a game where you're trying to establish that momentum. But again, you kind of look at the other opportunities this Bruins team had to land a punch against Antti Renta. They didn't even wind up. They didn't wasn't like he was tested that much, other than as you said that Marchand chance pretty early on in the game.
And also, it's their backup goalie. Like that's the other part.
That
Remember,
too,
we've
Evan.
said this the whole time. Like this is where you take advantage of this. Like that's where you can exploit. They haven't even been able to get to exploit that in Carolina. They just can't infiltrate the interior of their defense at all, and that's an issue. That's a really freaking big issue. And I think the big thing with this, because you mentioned again the secondary scoring, people are going to kind of over the next couple months, given how this series ends up turning out. If they lose in 7, lose in 6, they win, they lose the next round, whatever. Who do you blame for the shortcomings in the middle 6? And personnel wise, you can blame Sweeney, you can blame Cassidy for coaching. I think at some level though, like kind of on the players, right? Like at some level it's on the guys controlling themselves. Like I think it's at some level there is that. I think there's blame to be tossed around everywhere. But I do genuinely believe that this is a weird situation where you can't fully blame Sweeney, you can't fully blame Cassidy. It's more just these guys are not getting to these dirty areas. They are not producing offensively, and I don't know if there is a potion or a thing you can a switch you can flip to fix that. So I don't know. And again, game 6, you have the favorable matchups. I think they're going to be fine in game 6. I think it comes down to game 7, which is what is going to be kind of the big thing, the ultimate final exam, so to speak, Connor, in this series. And there's one huge question going into game 6. And Jack asked Brick this late on the broadcast, and I thought it was accurate. Who starts in net for game 6? I say you stay with Swayman. Even though he has not gone 4 straight all year, I think you got to go with the guy who's won you games in this series. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think you have to stay with Swayman at this point. I mean, backs up against the wall. Again, I don't know if he was the. You could make the same argument that we even talked about in these games. Games 1 and 2 where they've lost, where with Olmark, where he wasn't exactly the culprit responsible for losing those
Yeah.
games. Make the same thing a 5-1 final. I don't know how many of them you're gonna indirectly put on Swayman. Was he good? No, he was pretty shaky, but all things considered, I still think the bigger issues are the secondary scoring, the lack of generating offense outside of that Bergeron line, especially when they're bottled up.
Or
So
Connor Clifton.
yeah, exactly. When Conor Clifton's the lone guy who's scoring, bit of an issue, isn't it? So I think for the Bruins, you stick with the rookie goalie. I think you start going into that dangerous game of going back and forth, and who you turn to in this situation, whose confidence rises and lowers with a situation like that. So I think you stick with Swayman. If you go down with the ship with him, I think you're more or less at peace with that, right? Because he's the one who's won you 2 games. He's the one who got it to 2-2 going back to Raleigh in this series. So roll dice with that, because regardless of how your goalie plays, you're not going to get past this Carolina team either in game 6 or 7 if more guys aren't pulling on the rope up front and adding to that secondary scoring.
Oh no. And again, I mean, I think it's going to be a really bad sign if you go into game 6, you win, but Bergeron, Marchand, and Pastrnak score all of your goals. It's like, okay, well, this is a
We've
great
seen
sign
this
for game
script
7.
before, yes.
Yeah, we've seen the script. That's
It's
the
like a
other
Fast
thing.
and Furious movie. It's like
It
we
is.
know how.
At this point, it's like Fast and Furious 5 or 6. This is every year. And it's just, I think people are sick of it because everyone was sick of this last year and the year before and the year before. And just that secondary scoring just does not kick in. I don't know what it is about the postseason, but the secondary scoring just decides they're not showing up. And they're going to need to show up in the next 2 games. Game 6 all comes down to that. All comes down to game 7. I'm going to save our predictions for the rest of how the rest of the series is going to go out. I'm going to save that for Poke the Bear because it's going to leave something for people. But anyways, that is the post-game show for game 5. Underwhelming for sure. The game, not the post-game show. The post-game show was electric. I'm talking about just the game itself was underwhelming. 5-1 the final. We'll see you guys Thursday night for game number 6.